The Urek Mazino spin-off is officially available in English with 3 entire chapters, which was unthinkable a few weeks ago, and I'm so excited. I just got done reading them last night. The reaction is up on the channel, and my god, the characters, the lore, the art, everything about it has captured my attention and brings back so much nostalgia from early Tower of God, and I want an excuse to talk about it, so today we're gonna break down the 5 huge, biggest revelations and reveals in the Tower of God Urek Mazino spinoff. But if you haven't read it yet, you can go read it. I highly recommend it. It's so much fun. Like I said, it brings back a lot of that classic Tower of God nostalgia that was really kind of missing from Season 3. I love Season 3, but it's clear that Tower of God has shifted its focus quite a lot. And even though the spinoff with Urek has like brand new characters, the feeling is very similar to that old classic Tower of God style. And it's so cool seeing what has changed, but also what has stayed the same in Urek's time. So let's break it down. I'm gonna try to go smallest to largest reveal here. So number 5 is gonna be that the testing floor has remained largely the same since Urek's time. We don't know how long ago this takes place, but a lot of the settings and tests appear to be almost identical. The floating ship, or castle as it's called now, even though it was kind of not really called the same thing back in Season 1, looks almost the exact same. And the very first test that regulars take on the second floor is almost exactly the same. I keep using the word almost though because there are some key differences. First of all, we don't see the E13 logo on the floating castle, which sort of implies that Evenkel isn't there. Now, it is still referred to as a kind of hell like the test, but it's not called Evenkel's hell. This implies to me that, using blog post information, Evenkel has not arrived and become the new floor ruler. If you don't know, Evenkel becomes the floor ruler of floor 2 after killing the previous ruler. I'm assuming that that has not happened yet based on that difference, based on the E13 not being present. Also, that first test on the second floor usually involves killing 200 people and then having to pair up with 2 other people forming a team of 3. And if you don't do that, then you end up failing. However, in Urek Mazino's time, that last part ends up becoming its own separate game later on, flip and flop. But Evenkel isn't the only one that would be changed. Obviously, the test administrators themselves are entirely different. There's no Han Sung-yu, there's no Lei Roro, there's no Quant. But what I find interesting is that, going into my number 4 revelation, there are actually a lot of similarities to Bomb's story happening. There are character archetypes and tropes that you can kind of see playing out in the test, but the biggest one to me is that the floor ruler is absent. This exact same thing happened in Tower of God, with Evenkel not being present when Bomb entered the tower, Han Sung-yu sort of filling the role of Evenkel, allowing him to manipulate the situation and let Bomb join Thug. Basically forcing Bomb to join Thug partially because Evenkel wasn't there and he was able to take over. And now with Urek entering the tower, we have Rahab, who is filling the Han Sung-yu role, and once again, the floor ruler is absent. The situation is very, very eerily similar. So we have an irregular as our main character, and at the same time, a floor ruler being absent, allowing a scheming test administrator to kind of manipulate the scenes. We have people from the great families like Lopopia Evelyn filling a similar role to characters like Anak, and we also have a princess of Jihad who is serving a similar role to Anak. I suppose you could make that comparison as well, and maybe in Dorsey as well. So there are a lot of similarities. Like, it was stated in Tower of God, the main Tower of God, that it is so rare for it to be taking tests with a princess, and yet Urek just so happens to also be in the same group as a princess of Jihad. The similarities are really eerie, so I think it's very interesting to be like, what there's a lot that are similar, a lot that's different, but overall it kind of converges in that, sure, the characters are different, but the scenario is almost identical. The third biggest revelation to me, and the thing that caught my eye, was Hedon. So we've been getting a fair amount of Hedon lately, which I think is kind of cool. We got to see a lot of Hedon during the Enkidu stuff, but what I really enjoyed about Hedon's appearance in the Urek spinoff is that he serves a different role than we've ever seen him before. This is the first time that Hedon has ever been caught kind of off guard. Hedon sees Urek as a threat, which is so interesting because it potentially reveals Hedon's true goals. We know that Hedon manipulates Rachel into pushing Bomb off that cliff, and Hedon is in association with Thug because Hedon is the one who assigns Ghost to Rachel, and Ghost is affiliated with Fug, and Han Sung-yu was aware of all that. It's a whole thing, but just trust me, Heedun is somewhat affiliated with Fug. And if so, like, how does Urek play into this way before Bomb ever entered the picture? Like, clearly, this is a Heedun who also doesn't know about Pentaminum, which means he isn't either, like, Pentaminum probably hasn't done enough yet. Pentaminum hasn't maybe even entered the tower yet, or at least hasn't entered the tower and also done the incident, which we'll talk about in a second. So clearly he's in a different position than we normally see him as. And what I think is so cool is that, like, is he going to, why did he ends up allowing Urek to enter, right? Like, he ends up saying, you know what, hey, the tower doesn't say no to anybody. Even though he invites Urek, takes a close look at him, and then says, nah, I rescind my offer. Urek then says, wait, I can find anything up there? And it's almost like Heedun is like, yeah, you can. Like, he almost caves in. He's like, listen, I can't say no to this guy. Like, that's my thing, talking about what's at the top of the tower. He loves his job too much, is my point. But I'm very curious, like, how does this play into Heedun's goal? And it was really cool seeing Heedun in a position of, like, normally he's like omniscient, right? He's the one in control of everything. But this time he said, whoa, this is weird. Which is kind of cool because later on when he runs into Bomb, he's like, oh yeah, this kid's kind of like that other guy, but weaker. It makes a lot of that season 1 Heedun dialogue kind of make a lot more sense, actually. Not even mentioning Yuri and Evan's dialogue, where they're like, oh, he's like Urek, and then they find Bomb and they're like, oh no, he's not like Urek. It's so cool. Okay, but now we get into, as far as lore goes, the biggest revelations. Number 2, Urek is a Shining One. So we don't exactly know fully who and what the Shining Ones are. If we're gonna take that prologue introduction to that first chapter seriously and not as like metaphor, then there were 6 Shining Ones that kind of oversaw the world. And they are like the strongest beings ever. They are responsible. They were kind of like light born from the darkness, and they're responsible for time and energy and life. They end up sort of representing the life, I should say. They are like the embodiment of the light that created time, movement, and life. But they ended up being a bit stupid and causing strife. And so the darkness that they spawned from, I suppose, or like the darkness that has always existed, created Pentaminum to put them in their place. Pentaminum is gonna be my number 1 revelation, so I'll kind of save some of that for number 1. But all we gotta know is that, for this number 2 point, is that Urek is a Shining One. We don't know exactly what that means. Was he born from a Shining One? Are there many Shining Ones, but just the 6 kind of primary ones? We don't know the full picture, but I imagine that Urek in this sense is almost like a demigod. They're setting him up to become a Shining One. Maybe he already is to a degree, but he's born with this kind of special ability, and yet he's the Urek we all know and love. Like, I know some people may have expressed disappointment, like, Urek, oh, he was born special, but like, not everybody outside the tower can be as special as Urek, so clearly he had to come from some kind of special background. It only makes sense. So I find it very interesting that Urek has now some kind of an explanation to his abilities. He's a kind of god on the outside. Now, I don't think the Shining Ones are axes. I had this kind of thought doing my reaction. I don't think that's the same thing. I don't know if the axis term has been completely scrapped or if it's being reworked, but I don't think the Shining Ones are quite that. So Urek is kind of like born special, but I wouldn't go so far as to call him a god on the same level as someone like Pentaminum. I think it's more like he can fulfill and become like the original 6 kind of lead Shining Ones. I think he could become as strong as them and become as special as them. He has the potential, he has the blood for it, you know? It's the potential is stirring within him, but it's not like he automatically is immediately like that. I think it's more like they want him to replace one of the original 6. What I think is cool about this is it spells out the world outside the tower. Now, I've heard some people say, are there multiple worlds outside the tower? I find that a bit weird. You know, I've heard some people say maybe that it is all one world. The 13 warriors, Urek, Pentaminum, they all come from the same world. That's what I tend to believe. I think there could be multiple mythologies and multiple bits of lore, not just around the Shining Ones and such. But it is interesting. I'm not entirely sure, and I want to see how this plays into Urek's character, because clearly, like right now, he only cares about finding Pentaminum, but we know at some point he craves the outside and he misses it. I can almost imagine that he took it for granted. The world outside, the people he knew, the culture he grew up in, and perhaps at some point he's going to experience some trauma and loss in the tower, and maybe with the kid with the hat, Just saying, that kid is like the most, sorry, that kid is dead. I'm just saying, he's gonna somehow end up with that kid's hat, and then he's gonna say, I wanna leave. He entered to find Pentamenon, but now he wants to leave to return home. My final point, and in my opinion, the biggest plot reveal, has to do with who Pentamenon is. If you don't know, we've heard the name Pentamenon maybe like 2 times in Tower of God, both times in season 1. The first time when Yuri and Evan find Bomb in chapter 2, and they start rattling off irregulars. They, Urek and Pentamenon, I think, are the main ones they say. Maybe even Enryu, I actually don't remember exactly, and then that's the first time, but then later on when Han Sung is talking to Lei Ro, Han Sung explains why they don't let in the big fish on the 2nd floor. They don't let in the dangerous ones, and it's because of the Pentamenon incident. At least that's one of the main reasons. Pentamenon entered the tower and destroyed Jihad's palace, wiped out everybody inside, I should say, sparing only Yuri Jihad, which is very fascinating, and of course Jihad himself. He chatted with Jihad and then was never seen again. We saw one little panel of Pentamenon which matches perfectly with how we see Pentamenon currently as this monstrous, shadowy, long hair / tendrils, shadows figure. And it's fascinating. It's so interesting. And what I think is cool is that there's this idea that Pentamenon, whether he's an Axis or not, according to this introductory chapter, he is a kind of being born from the darkness, which the darkness is like a character, and then Pentamenon was tasked with taking care of these main 6 Shining Ones because they were running a little bit rambunctious, right? And he turned them into jewels and then kept the jewels for himself, ignoring the darkness. I've seen a lot of people make comparisons with Urek and Bomb, that Urek represents the light as a Shining One, and Bomb represents the darkness as his abilities and the endless void inside of him. And I've seen a lot of people say that this darkness in the Urek spinoff could very well be the outside god, because we know the outside god creates Bomb, brings him back to life, manifests inside of him, whatever theory you subscribe to. And so that's kind of a cool counterpart. We have our 2 kind of main characters in these 2 different stories, one representing light and one representing darkness. And Pentamenon may come from that same we know he comes from that darkness, whether it's the outside god or not. So sick, the way that he just takes the jewels and says, nah, the darkness wanted the jewels back, hey, bring them over here, and Pentamenon said no, and was able to get away with it. He's called the King of Jewels, and his followers are called the ones who swallowed the light. It is so fascinating, and I'm pretty sure that we're going to see the Pentamenon incident unfold in this Urek spinoff, because Hedon has never heard about him, which means it hasn't happened yet. So I'm fascinated, I'm very curious where it goes, how much of this story is going to connect to current Tower of God. We have all these new characters, but how many of them end up surviving and potentially even joining Wallhike Song? We don't know. Is it some of them? None of them? Who knows? But I loved it. So I hope you read it if you haven't already. Maybe this has kind of inspired you to go read it. The tests are amazing. The art is incredible. The translation is actually really good as well, also from comments that I've received, people who've said the same thing. So check it out. It is available now if you want to read the first 3 chapters. If you don't know, we're going to react to these every single week. We're calling it Mazino Monday. That's our new weekly stream. So definitely tune in on Mondays to watch us read the new chapter every single week. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, leave a like on this video and subscribe for more Tower of God content coming very soon. We talk about lore, we talk about theories, all about Tower of God. And I want to give a huge thank you to our Patreon supporters, particularly our rankers. We have Louis Kihara, Mr. Nexo, Olaf Lind, Snap the Slayer Anime, and Soren Quasargrok. Thank you so much for your support in particular, but thank you to everybody who has supported this channel, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace!